The background and causes of the power struggle between the army and the RSF, two rival military factions that have been ruling Sudan since the 2021 coup that ousted longtime President Omar al-Bashir. Sudan has been in turmoil since October 2021, when a military coup toppled the transitional government that was formed after a popular uprising against al-Bashir's 30-year rule. The coup leaders, led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, dissolved the Civilian Military Sovereign Council and declared a state of emergency. But al-Burhan's move was not welcomed by his deputy, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemedti. He is the commander of the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, a notorious paramilitary group that evolved from the Janjaweed militias that fought in the Darfur conflict in the 2000s. The RSF has been accused of committing atrocities and human rights violations in Darfur and other regions of Sudan. Hemedti and his RSF have been vying for power and influence in Sudan for years. They have built a vast network of business interests and forged ties with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, who backed them in the war in Yemen. They have also gained popularity among some segments of Sudanese society, especially in rural areas, for their role in securing the borders and fighting armed groups. The RSF has clashed with the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, on several occasions, especially over the control of key sites and resources in Khartoum and other cities. The SAF, on the other hand, has been struggling to maintain its cohesion and legitimacy after the coup and the subsequent protests and sanctions by the international community. The power struggle between the army and the RSF reached a boiling point on April 15, 2023, when heavy fighting erupted in Khartoum and other parts of the country. The RSF claimed to have taken over the presidential palace, the army headquarters, the international airport, and other strategic locations. The army denied these claims and said it was repelling the RSF attacks. The clashes resulted in dozens of deaths and injuries among civilians and military personnel. They also caused panic and fear among residents who had to dodge bullets and explosions. Many flights were suspended and borders were closed as the situation deteriorated. The violence has threatened to plunge Sudan into a civil war and derail any hopes of a peaceful transition to democracy. It has also exposed the fragility of Sudan's security sector and the deep divisions among its armed forces. The crisis has raised questions about who is really in charge of Sudan and what are their motives and agendas. Sudan is facing a humanitarian crisis as a result of the power struggle between two rival generals. The clashes have killed nearly 100 civilians and wounded hundreds more in just 3 days. Many hospitals are out of service or running low on supplies and staff. Water and power cuts are affecting the functionality of health facilities. The movement of doctors, nurses, patients, and ambulances is restricted due to the insecurity. The violence has spread from the capital Khartoum to other parts of Sudan, where thousands of people are trapped in their homes or trying to flee the country. The fighting has also disrupted the delivery of humanitarian aid to millions of people who were already facing food insecurity, malnutrition, and disease outbreaks. The most vulnerable groups are women and children, who have been subjected to sexual violence, displacement, and trauma. Women have reported being raped by armed men in uniform or plain clothes. Children have witnessed atrocities and lost their parents or relatives. Many families have been separated or forced to leave their belongings behind. The international community has condemned the coup and called for an immediate end to the violence and a return to civilian rule. The UN has warned that Sudan is on the brink of a civil war that could destabilize the region and create a new refugee crisis. The African Union has suspended Sudan's membership and imposed sanctions on the coup leaders. The US has also imposed sanctions and suspended some aid to Sudan. The people of Sudan have shown remarkable resilience and courage in their quest for democracy and peace. They have continued to protest against the coup and demand a civilian-led government. They have also organized themselves to provide medical care, food, water, and shelter to those in need. They have expressed their hope for a better future for their country and their children. The prospects and challenges for a peaceful resolution of the crisis, including the role of regional and international actors, such as Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, and the African Union. The conflict in Sudan has drawn the attention and concern of the international community, especially the regional and continental actors who have a stake in the stability and security of the country. The United Nations Human Rights Council has adopted a resolution to address Sudan's human rights violations and called for an immediate end to the violence. The African Union has suspended Sudan's membership and appointed former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo as a special envoy to mediate between the warring factions. Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, and other neighboring countries have also expressed their support for a peaceful and inclusive transition to civilian rule in Sudan. However, finding a resolution to the crisis is not an easy task, given the complex and intertwined political landscape of Sudan. The power struggle between Burhan and Hemedti has its roots in the years before the 2019 uprising that ousted the former dictator Omar al-Bashir, who built up formidable security forces that he deliberately set against one another. The RSF, which was founded by Bashir to crush a rebellion in Darfur, has been accused of committing atrocities and human rights abuses in Sudan and beyond. The army, which cooperated with the RSF to overthrow Bashir, has faced weekly protests, renewed isolation, and deepening economic woes since it staged a coup in October. The civilians who led the protests against Bashir have been sidelined and marginalized by the military regime, which has failed to honor its promise of a power-sharing deal and a transition to democracy. Therefore, any resolution to the crisis must address the root causes of the conflict, such as the political and economic marginalization of the local people, the lack of accountability and justice for the victims of violence, and the need for a genuine and inclusive dialogue among all stakeholders. It must also take into account the interests and influences of the regional and international actors, who may have different agendas and motivations for their involvement in Sudan. It must also ensure that the voices and aspirations of the Sudanese people are heard and respected, and that their rights and freedoms are protected and guaranteed. Only then can Sudan achieve a lasting peace and stability that will benefit not only its own people, but also its neighbors and partners.